Hello, everybody. How's it going? Having a good day so far? Digesting lunch, ready to hear about people data. Thank you so much for being here. My name's Matt Bloom. I'm a reporter and a host at Colorado Public Radio in Denver. I'm so happy to be here learning alongside you as we get to know our panelists and hear about all of their experience. We're going to start off by just asking each panelist to say a quick intro and then answer a fun icebreaker question. What was your first job?
Okay,
We'll start with Christian right here
sure.
and then.
Hi everyone. My name is Christian Gaetano. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Achievers. So Achievers is an employee engagement and recognition platform that fosters cultures of belonging for organizations. So very excited to be here today. I'm from Canada, so I'm just in for the last couple days. So sorry about the accent in advance. But I'm thinking back to my first job. So I want to say it was my first job, but I did share it with my dad because I was a paper boy. But as soon as it became like -10 and -20, it became my dad's job. And so I really liked that. I learned a lot from that experience.
Yeah, I can go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea Dörler. I'm the Vizier's Principal of Research and Value. Vizier, of course, market leader in people analytics, based out in Vancouver, beautiful Vancouver. I'm coming in from Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm so happy to be here. We are almost already friends, we discovered out there. So the question about the first job. So I come from a family business in Austria as a photography business, and my mother was my first boss, but that's a story for another day.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Monet Hires. I work at Summit Materials and I lead our business partnerships, our talent acquisition and diversity. My first job, I was a burrito roller. So I worked at Qdoba. Yeah, that was my,
Awesome.
for those of you that know, you know.
Hi, I'm Andrea Osborne. I'm the head of HR for the R&D organization of about 2,300 at Genesys. You might not know who Genesys is. We're a B2B customer experience company. My first job, we were just saying, it was the epitome of you take someone who does something fairly well and put them to teach it. Does not work. I was a gymnastics instructor at 14. I don't know why parents trusted me with their children.
Good afternoon. My name is Jim Ritchey. I'm the Vice President of Strategy and Delivery on the HR side for Intermountain Healthcare. Intermountain is a healthcare system serving roughly about 630,000 square miles of health and healing in the Western United States. My first job, I was a little bit of a hustler. I was a paper boy. I mowed a lot of lawns. And then my first thing that I actually paid taxes on, I was a lifeguard. And I don't know why people trusted me with that service.
Amazing. Well,
Yeah.
it's so cool to be here with all of you inspiring leaders. I'm going to start by just lobbing questions your way. Just a reminder to the panelists, if you're listening to one of your colleagues talk and you get inspired and you want to chime in or ask them a question, just raise your hand and I'll call you out and you can jump right in. Sound good? All
Sounds
right,
good.
let's go. So, Andrea, I'm going to throw a question your way first.
Okay.
What specific kind of people data do you think is the most important for HR leaders to have on hand in 2023? And how might that be different than years past?
That is a very loaded question. So thank you for that. The most important HR metric or most important people data is the one that your organization needs the most. Let's start there. Within Vizier, we have about 3,000 metrics. So that's a lot of data potentially. But what we are always encouraging our customers to do is to understand or to try to understand where is the biggest business need? What does the business need to answer? What is the workforce question here? So I mean, there are, of course, a couple of very specific use cases. What are some metrics that everybody should have on hand all the time? If your organization has, for example, suffering from talent shortages, anyone in the room who is having, sometimes issues with not enough talent? Yes, I don't see any hands. Thank you. Okay, that sounds more realistic. There are metrics that you need to check on, like talent movement, volunteer turnover, involuntary turnover, resignation rates, retirement rates, perhaps, right? Very specific people data that help us understand where are people moving out of the organization. But there may be others. You may be really interested strategically in diversity, equity, and inclusion. if that's a really big topic for the organization, you need data on representation of demographics, of gender. You do want to know more about pay equity. You need compensation data for that, right? So every single topic has a lot of double clicks into the type of metrics. Compensation is a really big one this year. But I also, you ask, how is it different, from this year to next, perhaps? I think the biggest and most interesting conversations I held around skills right now. This came up this morning. But skills, what does it mean? We don't look at people anymore in terms of job titles. We look at them in terms of the breakdown of the skills. What can be done remotely, for example, versus what can't be done remotely so easily. You need data points for that. So I'm curious to hear from others what's relevant for you, but that would be like 4 of the most important ones, table stake data points that I would mention.
Great. Andrea, you mentioned vacancies, talent shortages, needing to keep a pulse on that. We've definitely heard a lot about that in the media. We've seen headlines about worker shortages all the time. Uh, Jim, I'm curious, how does people data help you with decision making for vacancies in your job?
Well, first off, it just keeps me up at night. Start with that. It's a great question, and I think in the healthcare space, we have an unquenchable thirst for talent. I think we've all read about the shortages. I think the hangover from the pandemic, burnout, it really is near and dear to my heart. So as I think about that question, I'd really probably bucket it in three different spaces. It starts out with a robust workforce plan. Then you need to understand the recruitment space, and then keeping our finger on the pulse of what I would call experience or surveys, engagement surveys. So when we start out with the workforce plan, I generally like to break that into a 1, a 3, and a 5-year look, right? And it really starts with X. How many, and let's just take physicians, because that's what's on top of mind for me this morning. So looking at my physician organization, how many physicians do I have today? What is my vacancy? So what's the delta between that? And then I like to sit down with the strategy and the growth office, my operators, finance, understand holistically where are we going as an organization? Are we growing? Are we going to divest? Much to what made my heart hit the floor is about a 36% growth projection over the next, I think, 5 years. That's about 1,000 additional physicians per year, which is a tall order right now. And so then you want to look at turnover. So how many people am I turning over? Once I understand really the turnover, the growth, the delta where I am today, then I really like to understand at the operational level, what is my risk, right? So I generally just send out a really basic questionnaire to my operators, and I say, assess turnover at a high, a moderate, or a low, and then I have a little algorithm that says, okay, I can do what I call Kentucky windage. This is how many people that's going to generate. So once I understand that X, then I walk over to my recruitment office and I work with a gentleman on the provider side by the name of Francisco Saladino. I saw some friends there that if you know Cisco, give a shout out. He's awesome. Sit down with Cisco after he panics and hits the roof of what I tell him I need him to do. Then we kind of look at benchmark from a perspective of how many recruiters does it take to hire, let's say, a number of physicians. And the benchmark data tells us on the primary care side about 30 to 35 recs per recruiter. So based on just my pure growth numbers, I know I need 33.33 recruiters right now on top of the delta there. So once we work through that piece of it, you also have to understand the ancillary support that would be required to support those lives, right? And so when you look at, let's just say, a primary care doc, their work is measured in what's called an RVU, or relative value unit, which 10,000 RVUs equates to 1 FTE of support staff. So take you down the rabbit hole.
Have you had to change the amount of recruiters you have a lot recently then?
Yes.
Yeah.
Daily, because that's kind of where the experience piece starts to come in, is as you keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on in the organization and adjusting the sales from there. So then the experience piece of it, anybody that's coming in, I try to give a 7, a 30, and a 90-day survey. And I think there was a session on belonging today. So one of the things I want to assess is belonging, because that really drives retention, right? Satisfaction, culture, patient care outcomes. And then the experience versus the expectation. So Was there a realistic job preview? What I told you on the way in, did I live up to that brand promise, which ultimately drives retention? And then you really keep your finger on the pulse through quarterly surveys that tell me, do I need to adjust the sales with what I'm paying? Did my pet insurance no longer cover iguanas and everybody wants an iguana? So I need to, invest in that space. So that's really, and I know you told me I had to limit it, so I could go on.
I'm curious, has anybody else used people data to help fill vacancies at your organization? And have like an experience you could share off the top of your head?
Yeah, I mean, it's really one of those things of thinking through what is keeping your business leader up at night too, right? That should be what's keeping you up at night. And your first question should be, what is the data that I need to help answer that question? Because we can all stick our finger in the wind and use our guts to say, hey, it's, we think it's this. Every leader will craft a story around that, right? So, one great thing right now that's going on with the return to the office or people being flexible, virtual, and mobile, right, is assumptions on what's going to drive those individuals and their experience and how do you make that better? And is that driving turnover? Is that not driving turnover? Right? And what can you do and what are the drivers from inclusion and belonging to broader employee experience to compensation? What are the metrics that are really influencing that? Because every leader will craft their own story. What's really happening is what's in the data, and then the story will provide a little bit of color to that. But you need to get that broader view, not just that individual leader's view of what's happening in their team.
What is a story that you have learned by using people data in your work?
Well, specifically that. So there is a piece of that are fully remote versus those folks who can come to an office are attriting the business at a greater rate than others. And although there is some not statistically significant truth to that, a lot of it is perception. And we actually, we're almost 80% virtual and flexible and remote. And it just so happens because that's our largest population, that's why there's the largest attrition. It's really easy answer, but the data is what gets you there.
Great, thank you so much. Monet, I want to throw a question your way. What has using people data taught you about underrepresented groups at your company, and how did you maybe change things operationally with that information?
Thank you. So I'm gonna kind of mimic something that Andrea said over here about the story and like what you're trying to solve for. I think that's like the most crucial part. You gotta be clear with the story that you were trying to tell. And just like stories are made up of multiple components, so is the data. I think early on, people might look at turnover statistics and break that down from a URG standpoint or just an engagement number. But in isolation, it's not as impactful until you kind of like build all those components together. So we look at what is our engagement, what is our turnover, how does that compare and contrast to like if you guys do onboarding or exit surveys to inform our ultimate stories. And what we've learned from that is, I mean, I think one could assume like every group has different feelings. And we take that opportunity to dig a little deeper and do intentional focus groups with those segments of population. So we can, not assume that because my data tells me this is actually how you are feeling, but we use those to kind of curate the focus groups throughout the organization with specific locations in mind to get better insights as to what people are, feeling and gain their feedback.
What if one of your focus groups looked like, and what was that experience like?
Yeah, so we did a Pave Your Own Way like women's focus group a couple of months ago, and we took women from all different roles in the organization, locations in the organization to hear about their experience. These were people that were self-nominated by their leaders as somebody that was kind of like on the move. And what surprised me most about this was one, they didn't know each other. They were like, it's kind of crazy to see because this construction's a male-dominated industry. I don't think I said I was in a construction materials company. So they're like, well, I didn't actually know all these women are out here. And I didn't know all these opportunities were available. Some of the asks from our frontline women were like, can we just get things in our size? Like, can I get a safety vest that's in my size? And I was like, oh, We don't do that. They're like, I mean, we make it work, but if I could just have gloves that are my size, because that's a little challenging when you have to, when everything is like male sizing, or when we're on job sites, can we just think about like accessibility for like restrooms and like women's needs versus men's needs? So that was a really powerful group for us to kind of just like listen to the teams, and we were able to make some quick changes.
Yeah, and I imagine even something that might seem like a small change, like a vest size, imagine on your day-to-day, job satisfaction, like having something like that must make a huge difference. Um, Talking about retention and the risk of an employee quitting, Andrea, I have a question for you. Can people data help us with retention and keeping employees around longer?
Retention is probably the most solid use case for analytics. I'd like to give an example. First of all, I mean, when we ask ourselves, do people stay to work at our organization? Of course, we have a lot of data points around that. Where it becomes interesting to understand why are they leaving our organization? What can I do to retain them? That's a different story. Yeah. Just to break that down a little bit, every organization hopefully is tracking their resignation rates. Let's start there. VC has a monthly resignation report. For example, we're tracking this over industries every month. You can check this out on our website for free. We really dig deeply in our 17 million employee records. So resignation rate is the rate per month of what we're losing. That's one data point, like you said. But then you can also and should also look at a little deeper, what's the demographic that's leaving? Where are they leaving in our geography, for example, our business units? Where are those pockets where we see higher resignation rates than others? That's great too. However, we need more. We can tie in engagement data. We can tie in exit data, right? Exit profile or interviews data. So to create this picture, you've already said this really eloquently, but that's the different data points. But there's one step more that helps with retention. We can now also predict exit risks, right? We can see that we discovered turnover contagion is real. I don't know if you've seen this in your teams. One person's leaving, two, three others are following, actually in quite some time, a couple of months afterwards. That's contagion. That is true. What can you do? You can look at remaining team members' risk of efficacy profiles, which are a conglomerate of engagement data, but also compensation data. When was that person rewarded last time? Did they get recognitions? When were they promoted last? 2-3 years ago, right? That's a long time. When did they have their last training opportunity? So these are different types of data points that make up a person's risk of exit profile, which hopefully we can use in an aggregate to say, what can a manager do if they want to prevent those other team members from leaving? So it's a really full story that emerges, but the simple metric resignation rate tells us a lot of stories of our employees. So that's one example we see a lot.
Jim?
Just had a really a neat project that we had launched, and it was specific to that. And we have a role called PSR, which is a patient service representative. These are people that do pre-authorizations, tell you things are canceled. Tough job. 80% turnover first year. And so through the exit data interview, what we were hearing was, I'm getting beat up every time I pick up the phone to talk to the insurance company. The physician's frustrated because my patient didn't receive the care. And it just really kind of drove or perpetuated this. So what we really started to utilize is AI in the space and parcel out those portions of the jobs that were less desirable, and then looked at the portion of the job that filled the bucket, right? And we created what we call a digital coworker, where people were a little reluctant at first because it's like AI is going to work me out of a job. It actually worked them into a job they love and got rid of the less desirable parts. And right now it's a pretty small study. I think it replaced at this point 7 FTEs, but I do plan on scaling that. And that was data at work.
Well, yeah, and I was curious. It sounds like it might be a little too early, but can you tell if that changes your retention rate at all when you do work like that?
I mean, that smaller group suggests that they're happier, but they're also telling me. So I mean, probably probably do ask a few more questions. So yeah, great question.
We were talking a little bit backstage about AI and how AI is completely changing the landscape when it comes to data. And as it comes to attrition and turnover, one of the things that we're trying to figure out is like, what's the narrative behind the data? Sometimes you can look at the data and you're pouring over the data so much and you neglect to sometimes ask the questions. And so one of the things we're trying to do at Achievers is we're leveraging AI to help go through all of the transcripts of some of our exit interviews. So it can objectively raise some of the different themes and provide more themes and more direct insights to our managers so they can actually start to change and curb behavior. So there's so many applications. We won't, AI is probably its own session in and of itself, but it's pretty impactful.
But this is one of the places where it has a huge amount of impact, particularly for HR professionals, I think, and around data, because the AI can do some of the legwork for you if you have the right tool and the right trusted source of data also, right? But really doing some of that legwork so you can focus on providing the business insight versus, if you're a smaller organization spending time crunching stuff in a spreadsheet or trying to connect data from finance to HR manually, whatever, a lot of that stuff can be automated. You don't have to just think about generative AI that can provide some of those initial insights to you. It's machine learning that can automate some of those processes and bringing your data together, and then you can provide the higher level of skill in providing the story and helping the business decide what to do with it.
Yeah.
For me, this is like the coolest space for AI.
Yeah.
What do you have a realization you've had recently by using that tech?
Well, so we have a new tool that we're using as well. So we're not supposed to talk about tools and what we're using, but, it's providing some insights because we're finally getting our data connected behind the scenes, like the databases from finance and HR, as well as learning, as well as our sales commissions, which is all separate, right? We've been on this journey of how we transform our data and get to a common story, and we're finally getting it all connected. So now the AI from our HR systems can start providing some insights around outliers or things that the data sees that you might not. And then we can provide our intellect to say, hey, so like I have a reorg that happened recently. A leader left, they're temporarily reporting to somebody else whose engagement scores were low. And the person who left, their engagement scores were low. Not surprising. But the new leader is saying, oh, it's just because of those people that joined my team. We knew that they were unhappy, of course, right? Now, guess what? No, it's yours too. But the AIs, can look at those teams and look at those insights versus just relying on you to make those observations, which is helpful.
I would say in my world, I'm also cautioning my teams because it's great that we have AI and it's great we have all these tools out there, but sometimes like data for data's sake isn't, you could just be spinning forever looking at these things if you're not going to actually action and do something about it. So I really try to focus on, okay, like what's the critical business need that we're trying to address? What are the data points that we're going to really hone in on to help us tell this story? And let's just focus on that and do that well. And then as we progress and get mature, then we can expand to other things. But I think that people can get really distracted just with the excitement of it all as well.
Yeah, for sure. And it is Global Ethics Day, in case you didn't know. But data ethics is really important, right? Your AI tool making the right kind of insights, using the right type of data, how you use the data is really important.
Thank you so much. Christian, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Can you give us a glimpse into how people data helps you make decisions in real time when you're at work and doing your job?
Yeah. That's a great question. So obviously we use data in so many different ways. Like a lot of the examples we shared are similar data points that we look at to run our business. The landscape has changed a lot in the last few years, where before we would talk about annual trends or things we're seeing in the market, where those trends are turning into like monthly trends in some cases. And so sometimes we would find ourselves spending so much time poring over the data, trying to infer like what's happening and then building out these strategies. And by the time we were ready to execute, the sentiment's changed and we're onto something else. And so one of the things that we focus on, obviously, as employee focused and culture first organization, is what is the employee sentiment telling us about the reasons behind the data, like what's actually happening, what's causing the data to show up in these certain ways. And so one of the things that we use is a pretty simple, I would say, but powerful tool is we have an always on kind of weekly check-ins tool that kind of pops up on Monday mornings for each of our employees and asks them a very simple question. How are you feeling about work today? And based on the response, there's a bit of a tree that helps them, discern the answer. Like, is it about compensation, your manager, something happening in your personal life? And that data is presented then to their leader so that the leader can actually kind of get a sense of like, what's the overall score of my team? And then a bit of more qualitative information as to like what's happening. So that's quite powerful. But what we find powerful from an organizational perspective is we get the aggregate of the entire company. And so we can see from week to week or month to month how the sentiment in the employee population is changing. And that obviously in the past 2 weeks with conflict in the Middle East, we've seen a huge shift. And we know from the comments that employees are feeling like we need to respond or be able to spend a bit more time talking about these type of things. But another powerful example that we find all the time, and Emily's in the room, is sometimes inadvertently I'll speak at a town hall, for example. And although the intentions are good in my message, a certain group will hear a couple of words and they'll interpret that as me saying we're closing an office or we're about to do downsizing. And so the next day you can actually see in the data the scores are lower and there's comments being like, I'm fearful about this new office we're opening in another country. And then we can really quickly get ahead of it the next day and kind of recommunicate it in a better way. So that ability to have this always on listening ability has been quite powerful for us.
Well, say you do get a huge, fearful
Yeah.
response in one of your pulse surveys. I mean, does that look like an extra town hall? Are you like telling managers to do different things when you get that information? What does that look like?
Yeah, so at the when it's something that happens kind of at a departmental or the divisional level, typically it gives the manager enough information and they can address it with their teams in one-on-ones or team meetings or that sort of thing. If it is something that comes out across the organization and there's quite a response, we will kind of reconvene as a leadership team, and typically we'll pull in the leaders below us, right, our director level, and we'll have a conversation and try to understand what's at the root of it, and then we'll recommunicate it. But it's the ability to get the information quickly and then act on it very, very quickly is what's the most powerful.
Andrea?
If I may just respond to what you've said, I think that's fascinating. One thing that's dear to my personal heart as a researcher, HR analyst, is that what we need to learn as humankind, as HR practitioners, I think, is to put those data points in perspective. So there's not one data point sometimes more important than the other. We have sentiment data, which is very important. We have real life data from people, events that happened in that employee life cycle. We have interview data, we have ERG data. So all of that comes together. And I think the important thing for the HR community is we can help business leaders interpret their data in a way that it really makes sense to them, that we don't get drawn into one or the other direction more than others, but we will learn how to put those points together and really weigh them in a way that gives them the answers that they need. Again, we are here, I think almost this title of this panel is how can we become more strategic advisors to the business, right? As HR, that's the point. With data, we can do that. Finally, we can come like the finance team armed with data to the table and say, that's what's happening in our organization. And to that, we need to learn that almost every day. I don't know if you agree with me, but even for us, it's a daily learning experience of how to do that better.
Absolutely.
Jar is the business person at the table. We're not the people person, right?
Yeah.
We're trying to make
Yeah.
work a more human workplace, right? That's part of our goal, but you can use a lot of data and your business insights and business acumen to drive that. And that's where you'll get the seat at the table.
I am curious, just like what effective communication methods do you use to explain to a leader, this is the story we're seeing in the data? Is it like a PowerPoint image, or is it? I mean, what gets the best response in your experience? Anyone who wants to pipe up?
I would say for me, it's a combination of kind of like all the above. Like we really think about, again, I go back to that story because that's probably the most powerful. And then you use some data points to kind of like validate that story. Maybe there's some visualization so they can like visually see trends and analysis. And then if there's any anecdotes or real life sentiments that you can glean from whatever experience you're trying to share. So you kind of have like a whole mix of whatever problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah.
Think about your audience, right? I mean, my R&D leaders, I keep touching that. I talk with my hands. It's something I just can't stop doing. But you think about who you're talking to. I have a different conversation with my finance leader than I do with some of my R&D leaders. I'll have 3 levels of backup from some of my R&D leaders because they'll want to drill down into some point. And really trying to figure out, again, what question are you trying to answer? Where do you think their heads are going to go? And what data points will you need to support that and be able to tell the story? I love being able to use some level of PowerPoint, and please don't put 5,000 words on PowerPoint. It drives me crazy. But also have the live dashboards. We have a lot of live dashboards that they have access to themselves. And I like being able to teach them how to find some of these answers themselves and using those tools.
I think the other thing that I find in the industry is we have about 5 different generations working within the 4 walls of the organization and really meeting them where they're at, whether that is a dashboard on a CI portal, or is it a closed loop communication? Is it a social media splash page? Is it a stand-up huddle in a nursing unit? You really have to communicate in threes, and you need to meet the audience where they're at just to really distill it down.
Definitely. 25-year-old versus a 50-year-old, you're absorbing things and information completely different ways. Thanks so much for sharing all of that. Another question for anyone in the group who wants to jump at it. If you were to talk to someone at a smaller organization that maybe can't afford a ton of, AI software, maybe it's like a organization with like less than 50 people. I mean, uh, what's a good starting point to start to use data more effectively for an organization that small, in your opinion?
I mean, first off, just benchmarking, and there's just so much information out there, and even just becoming part of an association, right? Being able to gather it that way. I think the other thing is just a basic understanding of the data and what are you measuring, and ensuring that if there are 50 people in the organization, you're all singing off that same sheet of music. Because if you're using a separate cut of it, I'm interested in voluntary versus all in turnover,
Yeah.
or however you slice it. What I've found is people, anytime you want to talk about data, oftentimes you're addressing a problem and it throws up the defenses, right? So you need to make sure that you're singing off the same sheet, verse, and page.
And there are a lot of great easy I mean, heck, Microsoft has some great basic tools that come with
Yeah.
Microsoft Office. Whatever your platform is, there's some things you can really do there to build the skill. But at the end of the day, even with a small set of data, it's going to be about the storytelling,
Mhm.
right?
Yes.
And what is the story and the headline of what you're trying to accomplish by working with that data?
Fantastic. I want to go down the line and ask everyone to answer kind of rapid fire style as we kind of reach the end of the panel conversation today. What is one step or change that folks can make today or the next couple days when they go back to work to improve their use of people data in their day-to-day work lives? What would your takeaway be? And we can start with Christian.
Hmm. Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway would be to check yourself a little bit if you feel like you are spending a ton of time in analysis paralysis. If you feel like you have no time to even get to the story because there's so many data points and you're trying to correlate all the data, put that to the side and just start with one piece of data. Like what's one piece of data that you feel like you have an interesting story behind it. You can articulate how it's impacting your business a certain way, and start sharing the news and starting the conversation with people so that you can get them on board. And then once you kind of tackle that one, you can start to move on to others. So it's really about not boiling the ocean and just getting started in rapid prototyping and testing and learning.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Andrea.
Yes, 100% agree.
Mhm.
And collaborating between people analytics teams and HR and the wider business has proven to be one of the most effective ways. We've done some research into this 2 years ago, and we really wanted to know what does a collaboration look like? Because if you're looking at a lot of data, like you said, analysis paralysis certainly exists. I'm an example of that sometimes. But what are we really looking for, right? And we can't determine that ourselves. An analytics lead needs to go to the HR team, needs to work with the business lead to understand what is it that we need to know now. And that's why I mean, my best practice or my tip would be, in addition to what you've just shared, talk to people. Go to them, go to your finance lead, go to your CHRO, ask the business leaders, what do you need to know and why? That's, and then rinse and repeat. That's an ongoing
Yeah,
conversation.
maybe picking one question, like
Yes.
what is our turnover rate, or like what is, picking one question and really digging into that. That's great. Monet.
So for me, and this is something that Jim alluded to, it's really, if you don't have a data dictionary, starting one, and it could, you could start from a couple of different data attributes and defining that, and then socializing that within your organization so everybody is speaking apples to apples. So when I'm comparing turnover and I say these are the metrics I'm looking at to get to a voluntary rate, everybody feels comfortable, they know how we got there, and you're on the same page. I think that goes a long way of just making sure people understand the sources and they're all speaking the same language on how you got to the data.
I'm curious, you said data dictionary. Like,
Yeah.
is that like an actual book that you'd suggest, or like maybe a shared document? Like,
It's online. Ours is online. And it's been an evolution as we, try to clean up our data processes. That's another big one, making sure you have clean data. So as we've kind of gone through our own evolution, we just started on a turnover side. And we're like, okay, multiple people define turnover different ways. And so we really focused on that first.
some,
I think that's super important, finding your trusted source of data and having a common definition. Because, you can craft other stories with a different data set. So given that that one was taken, I think I think the key thing is how do you build in your HR team the skills of storytelling?
Mhm.
That is the key, and I think that is some of the hardest things for more junior HR professionals to figure out. How do you talk to the business need? How do you craft to the audience and also meeting people where they are and understanding that skill? There's lots of great resources out there through SHRM and others, but some of it's just trial by doing.
Yeah.
I mean, we've done a lot of really great things with just teams getting together. Here, go try and solve this problem and tell us the story.
I'm curious, is that just good storytelling? Like think about your favorite, book or your favorite movie, those kind of skills, like that's
No,
sort of
it's
framing?
a piece of what is the data telling you? But so let's say not just attrition increased by 2% this month, but it increased more than it has previously, or it's still on the decline, but it's increasing. So what is the trend? And what is that telling us? Given the reorg or the fact that we did X, Y, and Z, we shouldn't be too worried, but we should keep an eye on it. It's really about turning it into action or turning it into risk or turning it into something tangible that a business leader can use.
Yeah, thanks, Jim.
I couldn't agree more. Just connecting it back to purpose, and healthcare is kind of an easy one to connect back to purpose, right? You're
Mhm.
caring for people. I do want to beat the dead horse about the single source of truth, though. And in my lived experience right now, Intermountain, if you live in this community, we have recently merged, and right now we are merging with 3 distinct organizations. Embedded in that organization, we have 32 subsidiary organizations, and hundreds of joint ventures that I still can't wrap my arms around. And I'm having a discussion with a system leader, and it quickly became clear that they were using Kronos as the kind of the source of truth. But then we have another database called Tableau. There's a 2-week lag in between those two things. So we had a high-powered room of people arguing and bickering, like, this isn't right. Well, we didn't have the single source of truth. And you would think, it's something that you should have established when you merged, but it really is taking that step back as the HR leader and saying, we're talking, apples and tangerines here. So
So understanding when, there might be lags between when
yeah,
things are being
I
delivered.
had a leader that was saying my turnover is not X, and then I had another leader saying, yes, it is. This is why your premium pay is at 13.1 million over budget. Well, they had a 2-week lag in their data, so they were both right. They just weren't singing out of the same, at least on the same sheet, right?
Amazing. Well, let's give a big hand to our panelists.